One of them, the first that I told, is probably closest to the original. It's from the city of Kish in the south of Mesopotamia, Iraq. And it is first attested about 2000 BC. And from there it spread all over the world. The second version that I gave to you, which is so close to it, is from the north of Lapland in Finland. And it was written down in 1909 by the authority of a fairy tale teller, Heikki Kokkonen, who was in that time a very famous storyteller. And he, of course, didn't know anything about Babylonian mythology, which was not even published at that time. So you have two completely independent versions, yet they are, of course, related. So how can this be? Well, first of all, stories are strong. Stories are strong. The personalities in it not. Their names, they will change, you know, in a second. But the stories are strong, especially if people believe in them. And this is a point that should be stressed again and again. This is not hard science. This is what people believe in. And this might be such a story about mortality, about the limits set to human existence, much more important to people than official religion. I think that this is one of the explanations why these things are so strong. Now, one of the things to come closer to our theme in these two stories that I told you is, of course, the eagle. Why the eagle? Well, actually, there are two animals, eagle and snake. Eagle and snake are, in many cultures in the ancient world, more or less immortal. And why is that? Because the snake can shed its skin, and the eagle can lose its feathers and grow new ones. And this gave an early idea about eagle and snake as a kind of immortal creatures. So what you see here in an European medieval manuscript is an eagle flying to the sun so that he burns his eagles, his feathers, his old feathers, the feathers of old age. Then he dives into this basin, which is of course the source of life, the well of immortality, and he comes out of it rejuvenated, a young eagle again. And this is of course also related to such things as the sea morgue, who lives in paradise, or paradise birds. There are all kinds of birds associated with paradise. They know the way back to paradise. And this exists in Oriental and in Western myths alike. And of course the snake plays a role in the Gilgamesh epic, and we will come back to that. Now, talking about Gilgamesh, there is yet another version of this flying to heaven story, and it was told in Baghdad in the 1930s by a person identified as Lili. I don't know whether that is short for anything. She is not identified any further. And this is recorded in a famous edition of the fairy tales of that region, the folktales of Iraq, which is still one of the most important works on that. And it tells the story of a person called Shamshum, so the biblical Samson, who again flies on the back of an eagle, and again we have the prologue about the snake and the eagle. So he flies, but interestingly, the eagle brings him to an island at the end of the world, in the last ocean, and he flies there with his son, and his son dies there because there's nothing to eat or to drink on this island. This is a fairy tale island, of course, that doesn't exist. Strangely, however, Samson does not die, and he lives there for ages. He becomes older, but he doesn't die. And he wants to die. He begs to die. And finally he is relieved by a princess who has heard about him, and she magically comes to the island and she cuts off his head, so that he is finally released from the immortality that he doesn't want. Meanwhile, it has been told to the audience that he has gained enormous wisdom. He has been reading, has been thinking on this island, and he has become a wise man. Now all of this reminds us in a way of Gilgamesh, who also travels to a faraway island and gains wisdom there. And of course the theme of mortality, immortality connected to that faraway island. So here we have already a connection between themes that remind us of this flying to heaven story and otherwise elements that refer or seem to refer to Gilgamesh. And by the way, this story, it was recorded in Baghdad, but there are versions among Bakhtiari fairy tales that are like it, and also among Kurdish fairy tales. So there are, again, many versions of it. So let's go a little bit further with these eagles and the flight of these eagles. To some of you, this might be very familiar. Of course, Kai-Kavus is also a character from Shahnameh, known to have tried to fly to heaven. And in his case, it has become a little bit of a different tale. First of all, he flies not on the back of an eagle, but he has 4 eagles that are connected to the throne, and they have been starved for many days, so they're hungry, and he hangs out meat. I believe they are horse livers for them, so the eagles try to reach the meat, and that's why he flies up. It's of course very clever. And why does he do this? First of all, because he's arrogant. He's one of the bad kings of Shahnameh. He's always arrogant and he's always doing too much. He tries to overstep the limits set to human existence. And of course, trying to fly to heaven is something that you should not do, because heaven is reserved to God. Now he almost dies in the attempt because his eagles become tired and he lands far away. And it's actually quite funny because Ferdowsi says that he lands near Amul, which is near China. And you know that is not very near to China. But anyhow, he is alone in a forest, and he sits there and he's injured, and he has to undergo the humiliation of being rescued by his own heroes, including Rustam. And they come to rescue him, and they reproach him also for being so reckless. And he prays for their forgiveness. So what kind of figure is this? And it's obviously not just Kai-Kavus. Here's another one of them, one of those evil kings. This is Nimrod, who is more known in Arabic and Hebrew and Syriac tales. And he is first of all associated with building the Tower of Babel, with which we started this series of lectures. But secondly, he is associated with flying to heaven in the same way, with a throne with 4 eagles. And here again, there's an element of arrogance in it, and it's actually more clear here than in the case of Kai-Kavus, because he brings a bow and an arrow, and he shoots it to the heavens. And there's a very eerie element here because the arrow comes back and there's blood on it. And Nimrod thinks that he has killed God, the God of Abraham that he dislikes so much. In reality, says the story, but this might be a later addition, it was the archangel Gabriel who caught the arrow and smeared it with fish blood, I don't know why, and then threw it back to Nimrod, to the sea. There is, of course, something very strange in this story with this arrow coming back. Of course, he was punished severely. He grew old in a second, and he plunged back to earth, and he barely survived it. And he too landed far away from his kingdom and from his army and had to be rescued. Now, this is a very interesting person, this Nimrod, because he's also the main character in one of those birth stories, where the hero is exposed in the desert and he's suckled by wild animals, and then he's raised by simple people, and in the end he becomes king, as Gilgamesh was. He's also, in another story, the hero travels to the end of the world and meets with the son of Noah, the hero of the deluge, of the flood, and he gains immense wisdom there, and he takes a bath in the outer ocean there. So there are, of course, Gilgamesh elements in his story. So we see here various figures that accumulate parts of these stories. That, again, as I keep saying, is, if you know about such stories, about this material, is all not very strange. But what is important about it is something else, something very essential, I think. This is Alexander the Great, the greatest conqueror of his day. In the eyes of many, the greatest conqueror ever. But here, you see him flying on a throne with eagles, in the same way that Kai-Karus and Nimrod did, and many other kings. And the artist who made this illustration perfectly understood the essence of this story. Because the essence of this story is not another adventure of this great Alexander, but it is his loneliness. This adventure actually isolates him from normal human existence. And his attempt to reach the skies actually dissociates him from normal human life. And that is so because he oversteps boundaries that mortal man should not overstep. But there's something very important in this, and that is true for all these stories. Although the hero of the story is doing something that man shouldn't, he still has our sympathy. His loneliness evokes a positive emotion in us. These evil kings are interesting for us. And I have actually collected these stories, and I still want to write a book about it, which will be entitled The Loneliness of the Evil King, which of course will be in part autobiographic. But I think there's something really important going on here. If you think of the glory that Alexander the Great already had in his own days, he was a figure of his own mythology, even alive already. And later on, legends were woven around him in the East and in the West, and his victories were made grander and grander and grander. And he became a person that basically founded the Enlightenment. He became the spreader of liberty, of wealth. He was the liberator of people who had suffered under despotism for millennia. And this particular tale does something completely different. It makes of this glorious person, this glorious Alexander, a lonely person who is seeking immortality because he is afraid to die. It makes him somebody who is introspective, who is thinking about life and the limits of life, which is almost an ultimate revenge if you think of the real Alexander the Great. So, let's go into this. Now, of course, the loneliness of kings is not a theme which in itself is very special. Kings are the focus of societies. They are the summits of societies. So loneliness is part of their job. Although you cannot help finding it very striking when you see modern monarchs being part of a theater which is not theirs, imagining a kind of loneliness in them. But that's not what I mean. What I mean is really a group of closely related stories about kings who are very arrogant. They curse God like Nebuchadnezzar does in the Old Testament, and for this they are punished severely. In the case of Nebuchadnezzar, he is eating grass with the wild animals. He lives in a cave like a lion, like a wild animal, for 7 years. And as you can see, again, William Blake, who has made this beautiful print, again understood the essence of this story. This man becoming a wild animal, he is an image that touches us directly, because we can understand his motivation for his arrogance. And in his case, his arrogance was only to say, is Babylon not a magnificent city? Is its tower not reaching to the skies? And for this he was punished by God. And William Blake understands his arrogance. He makes him an interesting person. He makes him a mirror of us. It could happen to us, because we have these dreams. And we can have this loneliness. This is why this unique figure that comes from ancient antiquity is so appealing to us. So, what does this have to do with Gilgamesh? Well, all of these evil kings, they are seeking to find immortal fame, if not to cross the boundaries of human mortality. And this, of course, is exactly what Gilgamesh tries to do, because he is horrified by death. And this is one of the two pillars of the Gilgamesh epic. The Gilgamesh epic is about the fear of death and about love. And they form a unity in the epic. And as I said, time and again, and the more I read it, the more I am amazed about it. Rilke, without having any knowledge at all about ancient Mesopotamian literature, immediately knew that it was about this. And I could give you 2 meters of interpretations, scholarly interpretations of the Gilgamesh epic, and they're not as good as Rilke's first intuitive interpretation of this, because it is really about Todesfurcht, about fear of death that we're talking, about the very essence of human life. So, let's walk through the Gilgamesh epic again with some citations from it, and then I will try to show you what I mean. First, the opening lines, which are so important for the understanding of the epic. This introduces the hero Gilgamesh. He who saw the deep, the foundation of the country, who knew, let's say, everything, was wise in everything. Gilgamesh who saw the deep, the foundation of the country, who knew everything, was wise in everything. He learned the totality of wisdom about everything. He saw the secret and uncovered the hidden. He brought back a message from the antediluvian age. He came a distant road and was weary but granted rest. He sat down on a steady all his labors. He built the wall of Uruk the sheepfold, of holy Eanna, the main shrine, the main storehouse. See its walls, see its wall, which is like a strand of wool. View its parapets, which nobody can replicate. Take the stairway that has been there since ancient times, and draw near to Eanna, the seat of the goddess Ishtar, that no later king can replicate, nor any man. Go up the wall of Uruk and walk around. Survey the foundation platform, inspect the brickwork, see if its brickwork is not kiln-fired brick, and see if the 7 sages did not lay its foundations. And as I said previously, this is the narrator, this is the poet speaking to us. And he is giving us a very important hint about the meaning of his composition, of his immortal poem, which is that although man cannot achieve immortality, he can do something which the gods will never be able to do, and that is achieve immortal fame, immortal glory. And it is expressed here by the walls of Uruk. And although made of clay, and although they will be destroyed in time, they have an immortal name, they have an immortal fame, they have an immortal mythology, as Gilgamesh himself has. This is, of course, the interesting analogy that the walls of Uruk made of clay are like the tablets on which the epic is written, which are also made of clay, and which have made Gilgamesh immortal after all. And he starts with these lines, and he ends with these lines. But in the end, it is Gilgamesh who pronounces them. So he takes over the perspective of the narrator. And this is probably the most pure ring composition that you have in literature, because the epic is really enclosed by the walls of Uruk. It's a very interesting metaphor that is going on here. Now, we have talked about the creation of Enkidu. Why? Because Gilgamesh was initially behaving like a despot, and he needed to be balanced. So the gods created Enkidu to be his companion. And now an aspect that has not been addressed very well, I think, in the epic, that is that of the love of Gilgamesh and Enkidu. From the first moment that Enkidu is introduced, he is described in terms of love. For instance, in a dream that Gilgamesh sees before Enkidu comes to the city, he describes, in his dream, he sees Enkidu as an axe, a giant axe lying in the street. He rose to talk to his mother. "Oh mother, I've seen another dream. In the street of Uruk Main Street, an axe was lying, and people were gathering around it. The axe itself, its appearance was strange, I saw it and I became glad. I loved it like a wife, caressing it and embracing it. I took it up and put it at my side. Now, of course, there have been all kinds of speculations about this. I think the most superficial one is one from the early days of the interpretation of the epic, I believe from the 1930s. That is that Gilgamesh engages in a kind of juvenile homosexuality, and throughout the story he becomes mature and he becomes wise, and then he marries a wife and he behaves normally. That is, of course, not how we want to destroy this story, because the poet really consciously constructs a very essential bond between Enkidu and Gilgamesh, a higher version of love, which is exclusive in the sense that the entire mortal existence of Gilgamesh is filled with Enkidu. They are like twins. This is what he's, I think, trying to say. And he casts this in a very, very beautiful poetry, and he repeats this with metaphors like the X all the time. Also to prepare us, of course, for the final tragedy that has to come. And this Enkidu, he's such a sweet character. We all feel so sorry for him, especially this wonderful scene I told you last time. He is a wild man, and he lives with the wild beasts. He runs with the gazelles, he drinks with the wild donkeys in the desert. And then he sleeps with the prostitutes, and he goes back to his animals afterwards. And to his immense terror, the animals run away from him. The animals with which he was raised are terrified of him, and they run away. And he becomes weak when he sees that. He starts to tremble because he understands something. He understands that he has become mortal. Because animals, these beautiful donkeys, this is in the central desert of Iran, they have no past and they have no future. They have no imagination of that, and therefore they are immortal. And Enkidu was immortal in that sense until he became aware, which is symbolized by having sex, which is of course something that is very widespread in all kinds of cultures. So this Enkidu becomes dear to us only by this scene already, because we can already feel his doom. He is doomed from the start, and by extension Gilgamesh is doomed. Everything in the epic works towards this tragic end. So he comes to Uruk. A famous scene, as I said, is this one line in the epic which is, I think, so meaningful. He sees this glorious city, Uruk, the seat of the gods, the place where writing was invented, the oldest city maybe in Mesopotamia, thousands of years old, already in the time of Gilgamesh. It's maybe the most important urban achievement in the history of mankind, Uruk. I'm not overrating it, surely not. And he sees it, and what is his reaction? He becomes pale. There's even a book about it, I told you, La Pâleur d'Enkidu. He becomes pale because he knows suddenly that he will die. Because culture, even more than those wild animals running away, is the life of humans, and the life of humans is connected with death, with mortality. And he sees that in his individual case, he will die. And yet he enters the city, and he wrestles with Gilgamesh, the despot, and neither of them wins. They are equal, and they become friends. And they go on an expedition, which is maybe also the ultimate bonds of their love and their friendship, to share dangers, to share adventure, to share experience. And they go to the forest of the giant Humbaba, a force of nature, and it's very difficult to estimate what Humbaba really is. He lives in the cellar forest, and Enkidu is afraid. He's really afraid, and he has evil dreams all the time. And then Gilgamesh says, again an indication about the meaning of the epic. He opened his mouth and he said, "Who is there, my friend, who can climb to the sky?" This is a clear reference to our heaven story that I told you. "Only the gods have dwelled forever in sunlight. As for man, his days are numbered, Whatever he may do is but wind. So they go into the forest to achieve immortal glory. And they kill the giant Humbaba. Now, very interesting, in this scene where they are about to kill Humbaba, this giant, this green giant in his strange fairy tale forest, starts to speak not to Gilgamesh but to Enkidu. And he tries to convince him, and he says, I know you, and I've always known you. When you were young, I could have hanged you at the entrance of my forest. I saw you run with the animals. I know you. I know who you are. Enkidu and Humbaba belong to the same world, and Humbaba is like a king, a half deity of this green forest. And it is actually quite interesting that in a recent translation of the English, actually in Origin Celtic poem, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, the translator, Mervyn, actually compares the Green Knight to Humbaba. And he says, I actually wrote it down, I believe, is the green man of the forest a descendant of Humbaba, the keeper of the forest in the Gilgamesh epic? He may be, but finally, it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that it evokes the same atmosphere, the same story. And this is indeed true. This is the interesting thing. If we read Gilgamesh, which is an epic of, in origin, almost 4,000 years old, we can relate to this strange force in the forest, to this green giant, as we can relate, although we cannot understand, the Green Knight in the story of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. And this is what Mervyn means in his introduction, that it is almost eerie to recognize this in yourself, that these things are strangely familiar to us. This is again, of course, this network of stories, this mental DNA that we carry. So let's go back to Gilgamesh now, and let's come to the essence of it. Gilgamesh, as I told you, is seen by the gods as arrogant. He has killed Humbaba, he has killed the bull of heaven, together with Enkidu, of course. But it was Gilgamesh who was the initiator of all these adventures. It was he who shouted at Ishtar, the goddess of Uruk. And he has to be punished, and the gods come together in council, and Enkidu sees a dream, and he wakes up crying, and he says to Gilgamesh, why are the gods together in council? What are they deciding about? And they are, of course, deciding about his fate. Because evil as they are, they do not punish Gilgamesh directly, but they kill his friend, Enkidu. Which is, of course, the severest punishment that they can mete out to him. And then it reads,